Newswatch, and back to this global warming hysteria that's completely taken over the ABC, the national broadcaster. Last night, its Media Watch show devoted its entire program to attacking Sky News. The whole show, because Media Watch host Paul Barry was furious that some of us here won't go along with this hysteria, furious that we stick to the facts.
Amount of expert opinion is enough to convince the know-it-alls on Sky and 2GB and in the News Corp papers.
Well, Paul, you're absolutely right. No opinions will convince me. And that is all you offered last night, opinions. What impresses me are facts. Facts like this, that, yes, these are terrible fires. They were among our worst, but they were not the worst. Not unprecedented, as the ABC keeps claiming. In 1974, 10 times more land was burned. And 5 times in the past 100 years, 5 times we've had fires that have killed more people, alas. But the key fact is this. This is the fact that had Barry frothing last night, which he did not even try to prove wrong. Yes, the planet has warmed slightly over the past centuries, as I've said for years, but scientists say this drought that has made the bush so dry cannot be blamed on global warming. It's about ocean patterns. But most importantly, no cuts that we make to our emissions can change the world's climate, let alone enough to make bushfires stop. So that's the central thing. So unable to prove me wrong, unable to prove wrong what I have said and others have said, Paul Barry last night mocked what we didn't say. Lunatic stuff.
News Corp's ridicule of climate science is not unprecedented.
You'd assume from that clip that I was, as Barry claimed, ridiculing climate science. And that is completely false. It was just another Paul Barry trick, because I still have the script of what I said. You can see it on the video. And what I did call lunatic were, and I quote, the activists and journalists blaming their Prime Minister for causing the fires by not magically changing the world's temperature. Lunatic stuff. That's what I said. I was mocking activists telling outright falsehoods, and Paul Barry on the ABC pretends I was instead mocking science. What a sneaky man. Another example of Barry's pathetic fact-free attack.
Sky's big stars, featured in this ad in the Telegraph, Peter Credlin, Andrew Bolt, Paul Murray, Chris Kenny and Alan Jones, spread a similar message on man-made global warming, and they don't mince their words.
The bottom line, global warming may actually not be all bad at all. Note that Barry presents what I just said there as obviously terrible. This is a horrific thing, but nowhere in last night's show did he try to explain why I was wrong. His gig is to mock and not disprove, to appeal to the peanut crowd. Now, any idiot can do that, and last night, indeed, one did. But, in fact, even one of Paul Barry's favourite climate scientists admits that global warming is making the planet greener, because carbon dioxide is plant food. And the science also shows that grain crops are getting bigger and cyclones are getting fewer. That's unambiguously true. And that has to be good, right? But pointing out that this silver lining exists, well, to the ABC, that is heresy. Because to them, and to Paul Barry, global warming is not a science. It is a religion. Joining me on Newswatch this year again is Gerard Henderson, head of the Sydney Institute, columnist with the Australian newspaper, and author of the Media Watchdog blog. Gerard, thank you so much for your time. Media Watch, a whole show attacking Sky News for having commentators who don't think bushfires can be stopped just by cutting our global warming gases. Fair enough?
Well, I thought the show was remarkably unprofessional because it didn't deal with the principal point of the argument, which is this, that if Australia produces 1.3% of total carbon dioxide emissions, it wouldn't matter if you had a national government of emergency led by Malcolm Turnbull, Kevin Rudd and Bob Brown, it still couldn't make any difference to climate heating. It couldn't. So what Paul Barry did there was simply to admit essentially that point and focus on other points, often suggesting that people had said things they hadn't said, But once you go on Media Watch and you're the presenter, there is no right of reply. No one gets a chance to come on the program. So it's once again, it's Paul Barry preaching his views, and no one's got a right of reply, and people are ridiculed and they're verbaled, and there's nothing much you can do about it except to say that Barry exaggerates and distorts at times.
Now, if people are interested in this, Gerard, you spoke about a number of distortions. I've listed them all on my blog. Just look up Google Andrew Bolt, you'll go to it, and you will see just how deceitful that piece last night was and how error-prone, in fact, less. Among the evidence that Paul Barry gave last night to show that we here in Sky were wrong, although the commentators are singled out, other commentators have the other opinions, was that 100 or so people had demonstrated outside Liberal MP Dave Sharma's office in Wentworth a week or so ago. Are we meant to be impressed by that?
Well, I was very amused when I saw that, because I'd covered it in my column in The Australian last week and in another part in my Media Watchdog blog. And what you had there was a collection of very well-off eastern suburbs, a woman who is a medical doctor and her husband. So you had a combination of doctors' husbands and husbands' wives and people who were close to Karen Phelps in her campaign. It was probably about 100 of them gathered together on a Saturday morning, which is hardly a big crowd. But Paul Barry thinks that a group of people who come out on a Saturday morning in a very wealthy part of Sydney, 100 of them, somehow demonstrate that anyone who has a different view is wrong. No, I mean, if it had been a group of 10,000 or 20,000, but 100, really, it's... when that came up, I thought he was pulling my leg, but he wasn't. I think he thinks that's important, which actually shows the mindset. I mean, if you're running the ABC, where pretty well everyone agrees with everyone else, and there is no dissenting views are heard within the organisation or from the organisation, you can easily fall into the trap that 100 well-off people down in one of the most wealthy suburbs in Australia are somehow a very influential group. Well, I'm yet to believe that. I don't think Paul Barry would have any idea of how so many Australians think. But at any rate, he thought that was important, which I think was an insight into how him and his team of about 8 or 9 or 10, whatever it is, how they think.
Well, I must call a party of 101 people at my house and see whether that changes his mind. Paul Barry... I'll borrow your dog and make 102. Yeah. Paul Barry's attacked anyone who did not believe that there was a direct link between global warming and bushfires. Yeah. But what about the many people, particularly on the ABC, who have been grossly exaggerating the fires and the link to global warming? I was struck by the fact he didn't attack one of them.
Well, so was I, because I thought he might have a look at that. I thought he might have a look at some of that, because there was so much hyperbole throughout the whole time, and I got notes from people from overseas and others who actually thought that pretty well the whole of Australia was on fire, and these were very well-informed people, but they were watching the BBC and other reports out of Australia. Now, I mean, for example, Piers Morgan went on television in Britain and said Australia was eviscerated by fire. That's a completely false statement. There were very serious bushfires, but the idea that Australia was eviscerated by fire is complete nonsense. And then you had David Marr, who, my good friend David Marr, is in The Guardian. He seems to have joined the End of the World as nightclub, because David Marr said that we were players in these current fires of a similar kind to the people like Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck, who acted in the 1959 film On the Beach. And those who remember that film or the remake of that film, who have read the book, know that this was a depiction of Melbourne as the end part of the end of the world. So David Marr sort of saying that the fires, serious fires and a number of very tragic deaths, but serious fires, are somehow the end of the world. I mean, this is kind of bizarre talk.
It's
but
just crazy.
Paul Barry ignored all that hyperbole.
And we got to still check on Paul Bongiorno, with a commentator who said he was coughing to death in Canberra a month ago. No one's heard from him since, so I'm actually quite worried now. But maybe that was hyperbole, I don't know. I'm actually out of time, Gerard, but I just want to quickly show you something and get a quick, snappy response to you, because this can't go without mention. The ABC's baiting of sceptics continued last night on the Q&A show, just after Media Watch, when the ABC sort of trained audience mocked and jeered Liberal MP Jim Molan. Here are just some of the examples.
Well, I think we did step in earlier. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. But as to whether it is human-induced climate change is... Thank you. As to whether it is human-induced climate change, my mind is open. But this is...
Come on, we could...
That is a very hostile, biased and rude ABC audience, Gerard.
Well, that is true. That's not unusual on Q&A, of course. I mean, you had a Bain mob. Some of them have come out of very difficult circumstances, but it's the role of the presenter, the new presenter, Hamish MacDonald, to stop that. Now, he made one attempt, but most of the time he made no attempt at all. So you invite someone to the studio like the Senator. He opens himself up to the audience and to the presenter. The audience laughs and mocks at him. The presenter keeps asking the same question over and over again and then suggests that when he doesn't get the answer that he wants, that he's not getting an answer at all. Thereupon, Jim Molan gets rattled. He makes a slip, meaning to say that there's nothing we can do about climate change in Australia of our own, and that's then misinterpreted. And then he's presented as having a train wreck interview, and Hamish MacDonald and the audience are presented as the stars. Now, the message there really is the same message over and over again. If you're a Conservative, you won't get a fair go on Q&A, and I think you're very unwise to go on Q&A until people do get a fair go. But if the presenter can't handle the audience, the presenter is unprofessional, and you need a presenter who can handle the audience. At the Sydney Institute, everyone gets a fair go. At Q&A, if you're a Conservative, you don't get a fair go.
Gerard, that interview simply confirmed you don't go on Q&A as a Conservative. It is not worth it. Not worth it.
Don't go.
Gerard Henderson, thanks for your time.